The meeting of the subcommittee is called to order, and I'll recognize myself initially. Today, the subcommittee is meeting to discuss the Federal Trade Commission report entitled Emerging Healthcare Issues, Follow-on Biologic Drug Competition. This is an extremely timely report and goes to the very heart of our President and this Congress's commitment to ensuring affordable and quality health care for every American. Creating a statutory pathway for the approval of follow-on biologics presents us with an opportunity to improve millions of lives at a more affordable cost. Currently, brand biologics account for approximately 15% of total U.S. prescription drug sales, and the industry is growing at a rate of around 20% annually. In a couple years, we could be spending over $100 billion just on biologic drugs. According to data from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, just 4 biologics account for 30% of all Medicare Part B spending. Obviously, these drugs are costing the health care system a lot of money. And it's not just the health system, though that is being burdened by these high costs. For American families, biologics can cost in the tens of thousands of dollars for the most popular drugs. In some cases, a life-saving biologic can cost a patient over $300,000 a year. There's no doubt that these innovative drugs provide Americans access to groundbreaking treatments for devastating illnesses, including cancer, arthritis, and multiple sclerosis. But I've heard too many stories from my home district in New Jersey and from all around the country of hardworking people who just can't afford the tremendous cost of these life-saving and life-improving drugs. In a country of the best and the brightest, which we are, I have to believe that we can do better. We must continue to innovate and push the envelope to discover more effective treatments and cures for the scourges of our time. In the same vein, we must also ensure that these innovative products are available to patients at an affordable price. We're faced with a delicate balance moving forward between ensuring reasonable drug prices and expenditures, increasing access for more Americans, and supporting innovation. And I know that, we have different bills on this subject and we have significant disagreements, but I also think that we all believe that we need to move forward with a pathway for these follow-on biologics, and this hearing today is the beginning of that process. There are some principles, the same principles that essentially guided us with chemical substances, I think can guide us in the creation of legislation today. We all know about the Hatch-Waxman Act. Mr. Waxman isn't here, but I'm sure he will be. Oh, you are? I'm sorry. Yes, I know. I was going to say that. I see in the document it says Hatch-Waxman. I said it's Waxman-Hatch, not Hatch-Waxman. So, but we know that Waxman-Hatch has been a great success since its passage, or since it went into effect in 1984. And since its passage, more generic drug manufacturers have entered the market, driving down costs for the consumer. Also, pioneer drug companies have given protections that have spurred innovation, leading to advancements that are helping us live longer and healthier lives. In addition to driving innovation, Waxman-Hatch was also able to effectively and without any market interference drive down the cost of drugs. In fact, the U.S. healthcare system has saved over $700 billion in the past 10 years through the use of generic pharmaceuticals. In a time we're facing an economic crisis, partly brought on by skyrocketing healthcare costs, this is a staggering figure. If biologics are the future, then we should do everything we can now to control costs while aiding innovation, just like Waxman-Hatch did. So today we're hearing testimony on the newly released Federal Trade Commission report looking specifically at the issues of innovation, cost, and competition. The FTC has decades of expertise in this area, and I value their objective and comprehensive analysis. I'm anxious to hear from the FTC about what factors we must consider when moving forward with legislation and how follow-on biologics are likely to behave in the market setting as compared to generics. I'm especially curious to hear about what incentives and protections will be necessary in a biologic and follow-on biologic world that are similar or different than the current brand and generic arena. And I want to welcome FTC Commissioner Harbour to the committee today. She comes from the state of New Jersey. Thank you for coming to testify before us. And I'd also like to welcome the author of the FTC report, Michael Robleski, who has been invited along with the Commission to answer more technical questions about the report. So thank you both for being here. Why don't we just call it Waxman? Why do we even have to throw in the Hatch at all?
Don't go there.
Okay. All right, so now recognize Mr. Deal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pallone, for holding this hearing today on the issues surrounding the establishment of an approval pathway and a patent protection concerns on follow-on biologics at the Food and Drug Administration and the resulting impact that this may have on competition and innovation in the biologic drug marketplace. I also want to thank Commissioner Harbour for joining us today to discuss the results of the Commission's very recently completed report. I look forward to that testimony and to the questions and answers that will follow regarding that report, and we hope she'll be able to provide us some definition to the debate that currently surrounds this issue. As this subcommittee prepares to consider fundamental health reform this summer, I believe a critical component of such reform must include the establishment of appropriately abbreviated approval processes for follow-on biologic drugs, a priority upon which innovators and generic manufacturers both agree. In 2007, global sales of biologic drugs reached $75 billion, and current estimates suggest that over half of all drugs, both chemical and biologic in nature, will be biopharmaceutical products next year. Biologic drugs have provided some of the most promising benefits for a wide range of diseases, including anemia, hemophilia, cancer, diabetes, HIV, rheumatoid arthritis, and other debilitating medical conditions that affect millions of Americans every day. Access to lower-cost biologics represents a critical step forward in reducing the overall high cost of health care and will provide greater access to patients in need of these critical life-saving therapies. In doing so, Congress must be certain a balanced approach is established, which encourages new innovation in new biopharmaceuticals while providing more affordable options for the American people. At the center of this issue, the period of market exclusivity given to innovator products, as well as patent dispute resolution procedures, and the flexibility which Congress will give to FDA to approve biosimilars will directly affect our nation's ability to expound upon the advancements in the biologic arena and to serve a growing number of patients in dire need of these drugs. In the report under consideration today, produced by the Federal Trade Commission, a number of arguments are made which support the robustness of our current patent system as it applies to biologics and highlights the question, how long of a period of market exclusivity must an innovator biologic product be afforded in order to yield net profit results, notably with respect to the significant outlays expended in bringing the product to market? And how do current intellectual property rights translate into the field of biopharmaceuticals? I recognize the critical need for innovators to earn a profit on innovative and cutting-edge therapies, but I also recognize the importance of ensuring access to the American people, who simply cannot gain access to these critical therapies solely based upon their significant cost. Therefore, a delicate balancing act must be played as we pursue congressional establishment of an appropriate approval pathway and patent resolution processes under FDA for these unique drugs. Among the report's findings, I am particularly interested in the stated dynamic of competition which follow-ons are likely to face upon an appropriate approval mechanism once it's in place. According to the report, pioneer manufacturers, potential follow-on biologic manufacturers, and payors were virtually unanimous in their predictions that competition from follow-on biologic drug entry is likely to resemble brand-to-brand competition rather than brand-to-generic drug competition. And unlike chemical generic drug entry, follow-on biologic entry would not result in steep price discounting or rapid acquisition of market share by follow-on biologic manufacturers. Therefore, although the introduction of a biosimilar may result in a 10 to 30% reduction in innovator price and an introduction of a competing product into the marketplace, innovator companies are still capable of securing adequate positive returns on investment for years to come and maintain significant market share. And it is important to note the exorbitant cost of many of these therapies, which thousands of Americans across the country are forced to accept. For example, taking a conservative 15% reduction in cost of a hypothetical follow-on biopharmaceutical, which would cost $40,000 per year, allowing biosimilars into the marketplace could potentially save this individual $6,000 per year, which is a dramatic step toward reining in the cost of these drugs while encouraging innovation. There are a lot of questions which remain. I can remain committed to working on this issue, an issue which I do believe cannot wait any longer to be addressed. I appreciate the cooperation of my colleagues in this committee. Look forward to the testimony. Look forward to working together cooperatively as we move this issue forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Deal, and thank you for prioritizing this issue. And now the chairman, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today we're going to hear from the Federal Trade Commission on an issue of paramount importance to the debate on a pathway for approval of follow-on biologics. How long a period of exclusive marketing must we give to biotech drugs to sustain innovation? As was true when Congress passed the Hatch-Waxman Act 25 years ago, an effective follow-on biologics bill must maintain a balance between increasing consumer access to affordable medicines on the one hand and providing adequate incentives for innovation on the other. Life-saving drugs are useless if no one can afford them, yet making today's drugs affordable does us little good if we cut off the supply of future breakthroughs. We've made great progress in the last 3 years toward a consensus on how to ensure that follow-on biologics are safe and effective. Just 2 years ago, the drug industry argued that it was impossible to make follow-on biologics. Now there's agreement that it can be done. But we remain divided on what incentives are needed for innovation. It's no longer a matter of whether patients will get generic versions of these life-saving medicines, but when. In assessing how much exclusive marketing is needed to sustain innovation, I began with a basic premise. The balance we struck in the Hatch-Waxman Act has worked well for 25 years. It has given us access to affordable drugs, and it has not damaged innovation. Pharmaceutical R&D expenditures have not just been maintained, but have steadily risen throughout these 25 years. Under Waxman-Hatch, innovative drugs get 5 years of exclusivity. The drug industry has been engaged in a massive and expensive lobbying campaign to convince the members of this committee that the supply of life-saving drugs will dry up if they don't get triple the monopoly protection available to all other drugs. The drug industry is demanding 12 or even 14 years of exclusivity for biotech drugs. To support this extraordinary request, the industry makes two main arguments. First, that their patents are much weaker than drug patents and won't block competition from follow-ons. Second, that it takes 12 to 16 years for biotech drugs to break even. So that's the period of exclusivity they need. Though I've seen little or no persuasive evidence to support these arguments, the industry has blanketed Capitol Hill with them. The outcome of this debate is too important for our nation's health to let lobbying clout decide it. The cost of reaching the wrong decision is simply too high. Instead, the appropriate length of exclusivity must be decided on the basis of evidence and analysis by objective experts, experts who are not being paid by one side or the other. That's why I'm so pleased that the Federal Trade Commission has undertaken an in-depth review of all the evidence and arguments on both sides of this debate. The FTC employs economists, patent lawyers, and experts in the pharmaceutical marketplace. Their job is to assess the impact of laws, regulations, and marketing practices on both competition and innovation in the prescription drug marketplace. The FTC has overseen this marketplace for decades and has produced highly respected reports on generic drug competition and anti-competitive practices in the drug marketplace. For example, in 2002, the FTC produced a report on abuses of Hatch-Waxman that inappropriately delayed consumer access to generic drugs. The report resulted in important amendments to our law enacted the following year. Today, the FTC will tell us whether the methods we have used to sustain innovation in the drug industry, patents, and the market-based pricing with perhaps a short period of exclusivity, are adequate to sustain innovation for biotech drugs. And they will tell us whether the arguments in favor of 12 to 14 years of exclusive marketing hold up to scrutiny. Objective, evidence-based answers to these questions from the expert agency charged with overseeing competition and innovation in the drug marketplace will provide critical information to the committee as we move forward. I look forward to exploring the FTC's analysis and conclusions on these questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Waxman. Next is the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Woodfield.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for this important hearing and today on an important subject matter. All of us are in total agreement that some type of generic pathway for biological drugs must be created. But I think it demonstrates by the different bills that we have that there are some significant differences in how we create that pathway. We all understand yesterday that the Federal Trade Commission's report was submitted, and it leaves many of us with some serious concerns with their findings, specifically the claim that data exclusivity is essentially unnecessary in a generic pathway. The scenario outlined by the FTC would, I believe, unfairly tilt competition in favor of biosimilars by allowing them to capitalize on innovators' substantial research and development efforts at any time. This would create even more uncertainty, I believe, for innovators when they make their R&D decisions. I might also say that Professor Dr. Henry Grabowski at Duke University, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe he has the only peer-reviewed document on this, and he summarized the findings of his study that it concludes that without a data exclusivity period of between 13 and 16 years, the future introduction of important new medicines could be delayed significantly or deterred altogether, and that a strong, innovative industry is necessary for an industry to thrive over the long term. So we find ourselves today trying to balance the need for new drugs, providing low-cost medicines for our senior citizens. And so this hearing is vitally important, and I certainly look forward to hearing from the Federal Trade Commission today and learning more about their report and how it compares with Dr. Grabowski's report. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Eshu, and I want to thank her also for all her work on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone that's here. I'm pleased to be here to discuss competition in the biotechnology industry, but I have to say that I'm puzzled and somewhat disappointed by the subcommittee's approach to this critical issue. Everyone understands that this is not only critical, it's extremely complex. In May of 2007, over 2 years ago, the Health Subcommittee had a hearing on biosimilars. In October of 2007, subcommittee members met to discuss biosimilars, and the result of that meeting, as members might recall, was a series of questions that the members provided to the stakeholders and the FDA several months later in April of 2008. We received thoughtful, thorough responses from a large number of interested organizations and experts. Now, today, this is the first committee action on biosimilars in more than 2 years, and a hearing on an FTC report we received less than 24 hours ago. When we were informed that there was going to be this hearing, we immediately called the FTC to ask for a copy of the report. They said that we could not have it, that it would be available the morning of the hearing. I then, Mr. Chairman, approached you and asked if members could at least see this the day before. Why have a hearing if you can't read the report that you're having the hearing on? So we did receive it. I don't know how many members have read this report. And I don't think that this process really reflects well on, I think, the most distinguished full committee and subcommittee in the House. Now, I assume that the FTC has devoted significant efforts and resources in putting this report together, but I'm not convinced that the FTC Commission and what they have in this report are exactly what we've been waiting for 2 years to hear about. I've met with many scientists, doctors, patients who have much to contribute to the subcommittee's deliberations, but we only have the FTC here today, and I guess it was the decision of the chairman not to have anyone else. This is a report that has not even had been subjected to the scrutiny of the public. I think that we can do better than that. Now, what does the FTC report, as I read it, as quickly as I could, what does it conclude? It says that increased competition in the biotechnology industry would result in lower prices for biologics. It's exactly why I introduced, along with Mr. Inslee, Mr. Barton, the Pathway for Biosimilars Act. This is the Kennedy legislation in the House. Now, competition is always healthy. Anyone that has known me over the 16 and a half years I've been in the Congress knows that I believe that it benefits consumers, whether it's in biotechnology, whether it's in telecommunications, whether it's in energy, whether it's in healthcare, or whether it's in baseball. I'm a staunch advocate of fair competition and open markets, and I believe that my legislation will provide new competition while promoting sound science and, above all else, protect patients. Any new pathway for biosimilars must provide effective safeguards for patients and sufficient incentives for the development of new treatments for the most deadly diseases that affect humankind today. I'm pleased that my bill enjoys the support of just shy of 100 members, bipartisan members of the House, and it's received the endorsements of over 70 patient, physician, industry, and academic groups, as well as governors of 4 states. So I think that we need to be respectful of both efforts. I'm very proud of this because this is a complicated issue, and the amount of time spent with members, as well as members of the public and others, has been considerable. The establishment of a new regulatory pathway for approval of biosimilars is a critical matter for this subcommittee and the Congress to consider. I'm eager to get to work on this, and I encourage you, Mr. Chairman, to hold more thorough and more inclusive hearings in the near future. I'm glad that the FTC is here today. My understanding of the FTC is that most of its work deals with antitrust. In my questions, I would like to know where the scientific data and the basis for the report has come from, but I nonetheless welcome the FTC here. You're an important agency, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope that when I asked you why we were doing it this way, your response was, it's the only time we have before the August recess. I think it could have been broader. I think the subcommittee deserves that. I think the full committee deserves that. I think the House of Representatives deserves that on this issue, which is so critical to the well-being of patients and a process by which we can reduce the cost of biologics for people in our country. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. And let me assure the gentlewoman, as I said, that we will have additional hearings on this very important issue.
When do you plan to do that?
Well, as I mentioned, we are going into the health care debate, so I can't say when, but I promise you we will, because this is a very important issue for the members. Let me turn to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, mark me down as leaning ambivalent on this issue. Now, just like everyone who sits on this committee, I know we've all spent months looking at the legislative proposals dealing with follow-on biologics. I know I personally have been in meeting after meeting with interested parties, and I've become convinced that this committee needs to hold more hearings. We lack sufficient information, primarily safety information, to render an informed opinion. We do have two bills championed by leaders in this committee, and we obviously need to explore those divergent points of view involved. Certainly, I like Congressman Issue, I welcome Commissioner Harbert here. There are lots of things that I would like to discuss with the Federal Trade Commission. I'm terribly interested in the lack of the ability of our physician community to be able to negotiate with our insurance community, but we don't get to do that today. So my excitement with this hearing was tempered when I realized we're really only going to be focusing on a very narrow aspect of the biosimilars discussion, and that very narrow aspect will not include patient safety. Market exclusivity and patent integrity are important elements of any legislation authorizing a pathway for follow-on biologics. I was unaware that this committee had already achieved consensus on issues of safety, science, and the Food and Drug Administration. Assuming this committee has not reached such a consensus, then it is just downright frustrating that the Food and Drug Administration is not here in this room at this hearing. Now, assuming that we did want to hold a series of hearings on points of disagreement and wanted our first focus to be on market forces, as we will today, then a second panel representing concurring or dissenting opinions from industry would be appropriate, in my opinion. And then maybe we could even hear from the scientists and the doctors. Mr. Chairman, I referenced last week, I took a field trip out to the Food and Drug Administration last week. I had some wonderful interactions with some of the scientists who are working on some of these very issues, the issues of biosimilars as they relate to monoclonal antibodies. This is the type of research that may unlock a lot of secrets that have been kept from our physician community for years. And it's just such terribly important information that I cannot believe we're going to be asked to make a decision without access to that information. I'll be interested to what extent the Commissioner will be able to testify on the issue of interchangeability. Interchangeability is one of the foremost an issue of science, but it is importantly one of patient safety, and that should have a physician and patient at the heart of the discussion. I would not typically associate the Federal Trade Commission with such a discussion. And Mr. Chairman, I am fascinated by the prospect of a reliable biosimilar pathway. Texas is becoming a focal point for biotechnology development. Not only does this mean new therapies for previously untreatable diseases, with just the chance of projection that 50% of the drugs by 2020 will be biologics. So this is a huge economic issue for Texas as well. Just as scientists and doctors have just scratched the surface of potential biologics for the next generation of cures and treatments, this committee has plenty of work to do to find a compromise bill that solidifies our ambitions and meets or exceeds our expectations. No artificial deadline, and this goes to the health reform debate as well. No artificial deadline should compel us to ride roughshod over the deliberative nature of this body and regular order. To do so not only tarnishes this great committee, but could literally mean life or death for our constituents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Dingle.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I commend you for holding this hearing, which is very important. We're here to discuss the findings of the Federal Trade Commission with respect to its study on how competition between pioneer biologics and follow-on biologics is likely to develop. This is a series of hearings which I hope will take place, which is fraught with many, many questions of great importance and many fewer answers of any relevance or importance. We have a tremendous opportunity here to develop a follow-on biologics policy that will breed the competition needed to provide greater access on life-saving biological drugs. However, we also have a responsibility to ensure that the innovation that developed the current biologic products continues in a way that will breed new effective therapies for a new group of conditions. One thing the FTC report makes abundantly clear is that biologic products are different from small molecule chemical drugs. They're enormously complex, much longer, and they are also either products of or sometimes living organisms. The science is clearly different. The safety considerations between the two categories of drugs are different. And as the FTC report concludes, the competition between pioneer products and generic competitors is different. It must be noted that we will find that the traditional questions that FDA has had to address will be somewhat different either in form or in total. And the question of whether it is safe, biologically equivalent, what are the side effects, contraindications, and whether it's is effective are going to be interesting and different questions that have to be addressed. It also is going to be a major question before us as to how we address the question of biological equivalency and whether or not one drug is an honest, safe substitute for another which can properly be prescribed with expectation of helping rather than hurting the patient. In 1984, Congress granted the FDA authority to approve generic drugs, and we all commend Chairman Waxman for his leadership in that effort. We did not foresee the need for similar pathway for generic biologics. The science has exploded under our feet since then, and in certain instances, biotechnology provides clear technical advantages over other traditional therapies. We also need to examine if the exclusivity limitations that we create is reflective of true costs in time and resources. We also need to know how this is going to affect the cost of medicine and how it's going to impact on our efforts to reduce the tremendous skyrocketing now going on in healthcare costs. We also owe it to consumers to make sure that there is affordable access to these life-enhancing and sustaining therapies. What is the path forward on exclusivity? Is it 5 years, 12 years, or 14 years, more or less? 11 years, as the European Union has set forth. We need to create a framework that balances good science and the public health. We can also focus on patient safety and at the same time ensure that incentive remain for private innovation. The FTC report does a good job of laying out the economic and competitive effects of a follow-on biologics policy. However, we should be reminded that safety should be our #1 priority and protection of the American consuming public should be of the highest priority. Policy that protects the safety of the patient is paramount as we forge ahead in the new area of follow-on biologics. We should be thoughtful as we move forward, but not allow fear to restrict us. But above all else, we've got to move forward to get the answers to the question. Here are a few questions that I find troublesome. What standards will ensure that follow-on biologics are as safe as the original products, and that we provide the necessary knowledge to medical practitioners in the use of these products? As we study potential competition models, should we be guided by a one-size-fits-all approach? Or should we allow different approaches, and if so, when, how, and what discretion should we give FDA to use those? Or should there be a variation from one product to another? What studies should support follow-on biological applications? Can a generic biologic product be created that is genuinely or sufficiently interchangeable? People tell us yes, people tell us no. But in this area of enormous complexity, I'm not convinced that we can give a decent answer to that question. I am convinced that all these questions can be answered and that there is a way forward in developing sound follow-on biologics policy that provides greater access to current products and supports innovation in developing new ones. I look forward to contributing to that discussion, and I know that this committee is fully up to the task for which we are created, and that is dealing with questions of this kind. I am pleased the hearing is being held. I look forward to the testimony, and I anticipate much needed feedback from our members. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Dingle. The gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to say welcome to our witnesses today. And members on this committee have heard me talk a little bit about serving in the state Senate in Tennessee, and one of the things that I worked very diligently on while I was there was starting our Tennessee Biotech Association, and now that has 130 members across our state, and they really have become the recognized authority on biotech research in our state. Right now, we've got about 300 companies that are life science companies that are working in Tennessee, that are innovating every day, and they're working with pharmaceutical companies and bioscience companies, large and small, to create new products and therapies and protocols. And we're very pleased with the work that they're doing. We're also pleased with the work that is being done by many of our universities in Tennessee, which have taken a lead in this. And they received $580 million in external funding for biotech-related research in our universities in the past year. And we have Memphis, the University of Tennessee Health Science Center has Memphis BioWorks. We have complementary work that is being done at St. Jude's. We have the Life Sciences Center where Vanderbilt has a partnership, and that's in the mid-state area. East Tennessee State, University of Tennessee in Oak Ridge over on the east side of our state. And in the past 6 years, along with the funding that has gone to the universities, you've seen just under $1 billion in venture capital go in to innovation. So I'm pleased to be able to praise that innovative industry in our state, but I will tell you I am very concerned about protecting the intellectual property of the industry in that state. And quite honestly, as I read through your report, it was something that was of concern to me, and I am going to have some questions for you today as we move forward with this hearing. One of the things that I felt as I read your report, if you followed the scenario, the patent scenario that you lay forth, then it appears that biosimilars could be brought to market while they are still infringing on valid patents. And as my colleagues know, last week when we debated the energy bill, I sought to bring intellectual property protection for those innovators that are working in the energy sector. Yesterday on the floor, Congressman Larson, Congressman Kirk, and I had an amendment that went in to provide protection for this innovation. So this raises some red flags with me of how infringement could be allowed and product brought to market. It raises red flags to me that it is uncertainty that would be placed on our innovators. And I see that as a hamper to R&D, which we badly need. I know I am over my time, and we're going to have votes. I will yield back, and I do look forward to the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we all know that as we go into the 21st century and we look at the U.S. economy, innovation is such a key factor in how our economy is going to succeed. I think it's very important to remember that in the context of today's hearing, because within the innovation economy, few industries have more promise and more uncertainty and risk than the biotechnology industry. And the biotech industry supports more than 3.2 million jobs in the United States, and we all know many of these are high-wage jobs, but we should also acknowledge that this is an industry where the U.S. is still the leader in the world. This is one of those centers of excellence within the United States when you look at the global economy. Yet with all that good news, more than 80% of the biotech companies in our country remain unprofitable, and a third of the companies had less than 6 months of cash on hand. And this is with no competition from follow-on products. The companies that make up the majority of this industry are small. They have no source of revenue, and they're operating solely on the hope that they will achieve a major breakthrough in medicine. So one of the main issues up for discussion today is the issue of date of exclusivity. How much time should an innovative biotechnology product have on the market to try to recoup the investment in research and development before a follow-on biologic is approved? The average cost of developing a biologic is about $1.2 billion. Clearly, that's an expensive investment, particularly when you have no revenues coming in the door. I think we can all agree that competition in the market for medicines is a good thing. It brings down costs for individuals and for the healthcare system as a whole. And I fully support establishing a pathway for approval of follow-on biologics. However, I believe we need to be sure we are creating appropriate incentives for biotechnology companies to take the risks involved in bringing these medicines to patients. Now, I understand that the FTC believes that 5 years is a sufficient period for data exclusivity for innovative biotechnology products. I disagree. As I said earlier, this is one of America's strengths, but we got to look at the context of global competition. The exclusivity period in Europe is longer than 5 years. This is an industry that can move offshore in a moment. And as members of Congress, we need to take that in consideration when we set this type of policy. A recent report from Duke University shows that the break-even point for most biologics is somewhere between 12 and 16 years. Without an appropriate incentive, the researchers at Duke believe few companies or venture capitalists would invest the necessary capital to research and develop a biotech product. These products are going to be developed in this country not necessarily with taxpayer dollars. That last statement I just made about this is an industry that's financed through venture capital and other private capital markets. And the public policy platform we set will establish the proper incentives, I hope, to allow that private investment to happen. These are the issues we ought to be talking about today. It's our job to take these steps to make sure this innovation agenda has an opportunity to succeed in this country. And I would hope, Mr. Chairman, as others have voiced, that this subcommittee can bring in other witnesses besides just the one panel today to bring in other points of view as we examine this very important issue. I look forward to working with the committee on that, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I would tend to agree with Ms. Issue that getting the report from the FTC at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon really allows very little time to go through the 120 pages, and I have to admit that I haven't had an opportunity to go through any of it. So I certainly do look forward to the witness that we're going to hear from shortly. This is a hugely important issue, this issue of follow-on biologics, and as we all know, there are two bills introduced on the one hand by leadership on the majority side, combined with some leadership from the minority side, and also a bill on the minority side, co-authored by Ranking Member Barton. I look at these bills, I've studied them, I've tried to understand, and the one hand, 16 years, I guess, of exclusivity, and on the other hand, 8 years. The issue of interchangeability once these generic biologics, follow-on biologics are actually approved by the FDA, I think is a very important issue. And it's tough. It's a tough thing to decide on, and we just need, as my colleagues have said, as much information as we can possibly get, particularly in regard to patient safety, because as the Chairman Emeritus said, these are not single molecules or small molecules as we dealt with back in '84 under Hatch-Waxman. These are different. These are living cells, and every manufacturing process for these drugs are different, and there's no way to make them completely the same. So it's going to be a tough thing. I would hope that maybe there's room for compromise, quite honestly, as we listen to the debate and study further the two particular bills, because they're great members that are trying to do the right thing and trying to make sure that we get cost-effective, I don't want to say cheap, but cost-effective, they're very expensive medications to the public as soon as possible, but also that we have to always keep in mind safety. So I look forward, Mr. Chairman, to the hearing and getting more information on this hugely important issue. And I yield.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a new member to this subcommittee, and I surely agree with Ms. Eshoo that this subject is complex, and I'm persuaded that I don't know enough about it to have a final opinion. That's why I'm happy we're having this hearing and that we will have a series of hearings in the fall. I have not co-sponsored either of the pending bills because I feel I need to learn more. But surely I know enough to believe that we should be getting reports more than 18 hours in advance of hearings, and I hope that in the future that will happen so that all of us can be as knowledgeable as possible. Just want to say a couple things about the general subject. First of all, although new to the committee, I'm not new to this earth and I'm not new to Congress, and I remember 1984 when Henry Waxman did something very impressive, and that was to strike an agreement with his political opposite, Orrin Hatch, on a bill that the drug industry strongly opposed and that has led to considerable progress. So I really think these things can happen and be done right, and that's a history in our committee, and hopefully we will follow it again. But this time, I think this subject is more complicated, and I think the implications, as Mr. Matheson said, for the future of the U.S. industry are grave. I don't know much about this subject, but I do know what we did to the U.S. commercial satellite industry when, in my opinion, we got it wrong in the late 1990s, and we basically took away the market edge for our U.S. satellite makers. Now we're trying to get it back. Hopefully we will, but we lost 10 years. And so I just want to be sure we get this right, and I want to be sure that I make the best contribution I can as a hopefully thoughtful member of this committee. So I thank you for holding this hearing, and I look forward to learning a lot more about the subject. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for convening this hearing on the Federal Trade Commission's report, Emerging Healthcare Issues, Follow on Biologic Drug Competition. I think all of us realize the potential of follow-on biologics, and I believe we all agree on the need to set up a pathway sooner rather than later. I must say also that it would have been more helpful to give the members a little more time until we'd had a time to read and analyze this 120-page report, which was released just yesterday before having the hearing. I'm quite concerned by the report's assertion that no period of data exclusivity is necessary for pioneer or brand biologics because patents and market pricing should provide sufficient protection and incentive. This logic has worked well for small molecule drugs governed by Hatch-Waxman, but as this report points out multiple times, there are significant differences between small molecule drugs and biologics. As the report acknowledges, a generic small molecule drug is identical to its brand counterpart. A follow-on can only be similar to the brand biologic. It is this space between identical and similar that opens the door for a follow-on to circumvent or skirt one or more of the brand biologics patents. With this uncertainty over whether a patent will actually protect a brand biologics investment, biotech companies and the venture capitalists that fund them may reassess the cost and risk involved in the development of new biologics and opt not to go forward with new drug development. Stifling innovation and potentially impeding patients' access to the most promising cutting-edge biologics is surely not the goal of anyone on this subcommittee. Data exclusivity provides the certainty brand biologics need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars and years investing in the research, development, and approval of new drugs and the assurance that this investment can be recouped. I would ask our witnesses to carefully explain why they believe that patent circumvention by biosimilar companies is not a valid scenario. Thank you, and I yield back. Balance my time.
Thank you, Mr. Pitts. The gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Mrs. Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for beginning this discussion on this very important and complex issue at this hearing. As I understand it, the report was requested basically to determine if follow-on biologics would result in reductions in costs of these complex but very important therapeutic drugs. And anyone who knows me would know that one of my concerns is that life-improving or saving medication be accessible to everyone. And yes, cost is an important barrier to that. But as a physician, safety trumps everything. I've seen substandard meds marketed in the Caribbean, and while small molecular drugs that in small molecular drugs, that may not be a dangerous difference, the situation with biosimilars or follow-on biologics is totally different. I only had a chance to read the executive summary and some of the first pages of the report, but what I've taken away so far is that a clear understanding that biologics are very complex, large molecules produced under very sensitive conditions that are not easy to reproduce exactly, that significant investment is made in their production, and that if reduction of cost is what has generated the request for this report, FOBs are not likely to result in much of a price decrease. If the latter is true, then why sacrifice safety? And some questions remain unanswered. Why accept the similar rather than the same in the case of such a complex medication when a tiny difference could make a difference in its action and its immunogenicity? I'm puzzled by the assertion also that a shortened patent life will not stifle innovation. If it takes 12 to 14 years to recoup investment, as demonstrated by a peer-reviewed article by Duke Professor Grabowski, and that is likely after many trials have failed with that company and they've experienced financial losses, why should these complex molecules not have a longer time? Very importantly, the report states that technology is not yet, and I'm quoting here, technology is not yet robust enough to determine whether an FOB product is interchangeable with the pioneer product. That statement, plus the fact that not a single country in the EU has authorized interchangeability, and several have outlawed it, should slow down any rush to allow products that are only similar to the pioneer, and to require more of any follow-on manufacturer to prove safety. It seems to me that sufficient uncertainty exists so that the FTC didn't even make a specific recommendation for a period of exclusivity. I'd like to see these important drugs reach everyone, and that means exploring ways to ensure that that happens, including having the pharmaceuticals look at, after a period of time, perhaps reducing the cost. But I'm convinced that shortening the time of patent and data exclusivity would adversely impact needed innovation. And it seems to me that based on the complexity of the large molecules and the lack of information on several factors, we should err on the side of safety and make sure that we do no harm. So I welcome Commissioner Harbour and look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Boyer.
I've come here today. I also, like my colleague Jane Harmon, I have not co-sponsored either of these two bills yet, and I find myself in a curious position why we are even seeking the counsel of the Federal Trade Commission on an issue whereby we're most concerned with regard to the drug safety and efficacy. When I look at the commissioners from the Federal Trade Commission, none of them have any experience in public health whatsoever. You know, we got lawyers. Well, I'm a lawyer too, and so what I need is not the advice or counsel of another lawyer. I need advice and counsel from public health, from scientists. So we can have a conversation today with lawyer to lawyer. You can give me your opinion on what you think the marketplace is and what it's like. And I guess if you're going to tell me about trying to promote competition in the drug industry, big and versus small, and how we protect innovation as part of your core missions of the FTC, I guess we may as well ask you a report on NASA. Gee, let's talk about what big companies out there and how we can promote innovation to do exploration in space. Hey, the last frontier isn't even space, it's marine. So maybe we should ask a report from the FTC about exploration on the ocean floor. You can give me an opinion on that. Maybe I should ask for, I'll just make it up. So I'm sitting here today as a curious member of Congress, that I've come here to listen to lawyers tell us what they think about drug efficacy and safety. Now, I haven't had a chance to read this. I'm more than anxious to look at it. I'm also curious as to who initiated this. Did anyone from Congress ask you to do this? I don't know. So I'm interested for you to let us know why you initiated this, why these group of lawyers think that your opinion is so important with regard to efficacy and the safety of drugs. Now, what bothers me the most is that what I've learned over the years in dealing with the drug industry and biologics is that we do everything we can to promote this innovation, yet we try to find science into narrow populations. And it's very challenging because when you go into the marketplace, how do you raise that capital, at-risk capital, and if we don't give these companies an opportunity to recoup their costs and make a profit, they won't go into narrow spectrums. And if they won't go into narrow spectrums, then people then turn to government and say that government, you have to do it. And if it's all about innovation, safety, and efficacy, I want to hear from the experts, Mr. Chairman. So what I'm hopeful is that if you're going to do this today, please bring us a panel of experts, the FDA, bring in the scientists, so that we can have some equality here with regard to substantive testimony. That's what I'm looking for. That'd be my request of you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like my colleagues, I have concerns about this hearing on the FTC's report that we received yesterday on file-long biologic competition. We've heard this will be the only hearing on the issue of file-long biologics because the schedule will not accommodate additional hearings on the topic. If we're going to have a fair debate on file-long biologics and the issues surrounding H.R. 1548, the SU Barton Inslee Pathway to Biosimilars Act, which I'm a co-sponsor, and the H.R. 1427, the Waxman Pallone deal promoting innovation and access to life-saving medicine Act, the arena for those should not be centered around a hearing with one witness from the FTC. File-long biologics are an extremely complex issue, and members of this committee are divided between the two bills pending before us. One hearing with one witness who isn't from the FDA, an innovator company, a generic drug company, or even a patient who has used biologic is not a true hearing on the difficult issues surrounding file-long biologics. We believe we need to have a hearing with at least the FDA before this committee moves forward with any legislation on biologics, file-long biologics. I think we can all agree that there needs to be a regulatory path in this country to follow on biologics. And whatever we resolve the differences, however we resolve the differences between the two bills, we need to consider the implications for employers, innovators, the generic industry, and most importantly, the patients who depend on these life-improving and life-saving therapies. Biologics offers a tremendous promise in the treatment of disease, but there's no question we have to get it right. The undeniable fact is biologics are very different from the small molecule drugs and present unique concerns about the safety and effectiveness. Holding one hearing that doesn't allow us to explore the questions such as what effect does a small change in an amino acid sequence produce? Is that effect large enough and concerning enough to warrant additional clinical trials before the follow-along biologic is available to public? Can we in good conscience consider the follow-on products safe if they're never even tested on a human population? I share the goal of lowering patients' costs through follow-on pathway, but not at the expense of the same patient's safety. Any action by the committee must depend to balance the desire for the lower cost of biologics with the need to preserve the incentives for innovation and patient safety so that more Americans can benefit from the therapeutic promise of biologics. And again, I thank you and yield back my time.
Thank you. Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
I knew I could be here when the gavel dropped and go to the next meeting and still make it, so I apologize to the Commissioner. I will just read from the report here on the executive summary. Current technology does not yet allow the creation of an exact replica of a pioneer biological drug product, according to the FDA. In addition, technology is not yet robust enough to determine whether the follow-on biologic product is interchangeable with the pioneer product, such as that a patient would be able to switch between the two products without risk of an adverse effect. Follow-on biologics are not chemical compounds. We need more hearings on this, Mr. Chairman, and we need to have science brought in. And with all due respect to the FTC, they're not the ones. They're not the ones to give us a direction on the safety and efficacy on follow-on biologics. So I look forward to that, and I hope we can follow up with more hearings. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Harbour, for joining us today. I've really been interested in the issue of follow-on biologics for a number of years. I happen to represent a district that is rich in intellectual capital in this area. The University of Wisconsin-Madison has produced some of the world's leading research in biologic drugs. We also have a unique entity in my district called the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. We call it WARF. And what they do is they work with business and industry to transform university research into real products benefiting society at large. It was founded in 1925 to manage the University of Wisconsin-Madison discovery that eventually eliminated the childhood disease rickets. And today, WARF holds nearly 100 patents related specifically to biologics. I am certainly supportive of the creation of a pathway for the approval of biosimilars. And we will hear from the FTC this morning that when we do create this pathway, current patent protections coupled with market-based pricing are sufficient to continue to spur innovation in the biologic drug market. And yet, on the ground, I hear oftentimes the opposite is true. Even with current patent protections and without a pathway for biosimilars, WARF is having trouble finding companies to buy and license those 100-plus biologic patents that I referred to and that they currently hold. Developing biologic drugs is a billion-dollar enterprise with an extraordinarily high failure rate. To take that on, knowing that another company could invest a fraction of that amount and take even a small portion of your market share may be enough to rethink the enterprise altogether. I'm extraordinarily proud of the companies in my district who have taken on this risk in hopes of saving lives and improving health. Just one example is the example of FluGen, located in Madison. They're working on developing influenza vaccines, and we know that this is a timely and critically important enterprise. FluGen, like the vast majority of biotech industry colleagues, is a very small company. It does not have the profit margins of 50 and 60%, yet these are the profit margins that are used to conduct these economic analyses that conclude that only minimal data exclusivity is necessary. Without sufficient data exclusivity protection, FluGen faces the risk that a company will really come in and take a free ride off of their clinical data and design around their patent, forcing them out of the market entirely. One final point, Mr. Chairman. The FTC report seems to conclude that a long period of data exclusivity would hamper innovation. Currently, with no pathway and biologics enjoy infinite data exclusivity, and yet we have had an astounding innovation in this arena. So you really only need to look to the 2nd Congressional District in Wisconsin to see the best proof of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back my balance of time.
Thank you. Gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Myrick.
Mr. Chairman, but I'll waive.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Part of what we have to do here with Solomon's sword is to understand that drugs that are not affordable offer little consolation, and a drug that is not invented offers little cure. A couple of years ago, when we had a hearing on this issue of follow-on biologics, I talked about a constituent of mine who had pancreatic cancer, and he at that time was taking an experimental biologic drug, which actually shrank his tumors down considerably, but unfortunately ended up with some kidney failure, and he died in that process. It was exciting to watch how his cancer was going away and otherwise would be a lethal problem for him. It was troubling to see how he had to jump through a lot of hoops to get the treatments. But moreover, I want to make sure that we're continuing to do everything we can to encourage companies to make the investments to come up with these cures. I know that part of what we're facing here is a way that once we come up with these cures, how do we make sure that people can afford these drugs? And that is what I hope we have a lot of discussions on, a lot of hearings to really work out some mechanism whereby these become affordable. But again, I say that if the drug is not invented, there is no cure and therefore no hope. And I hope that as we proceed with this, we will both hear from witnesses with some ideas along these lines, but also continue to deliberate among ourselves and using all discernment possible to make sure that we do not stop either end of this. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Space.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to provide my perspective on what is clearly a very difficult and somewhat controversial issue. In listening to the opening statements of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, it's clear that we're arriving at a consensus, and very eloquently stated by Mr. Murphy from Pennsylvania. The need to innovate is directly conflicting right now with the need to provide affordable biologic medication. We have seen a tremendous boom in the manufacture of biotechnology, and the industry generally. The United States has been a leader, and it's something that we can be very proud of. I'm sincerely torn right now on this issue because I have a child who suffers from a disease who is alive today because of biologics, and I understand the need to foster innovation, to create an environment in which those biotech companies that are flourishing in this country right now are able to take the risks necessary to innovate and create new treatments and new cures. At the same time, I come from a district where many people don't have quality health care. Many people do not have the ability to pay considerable sums for these sophisticated medicines. And I do take hope in listening to the opening statements of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that this committee will face this challenge in the way that it should, with a sincere and passionate desire to do the right thing. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the hard work that you have devoted to this issue, and I do look forward to hearing the testimony today, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow. Gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this extremely important hearing, and I look forward to hearing what the panelists have to say. In the United States, competition has always been an engine for innovation, and that has been true in the healthcare and the industry that supports it. And while national unemployment numbers continue to be a source of concern, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that in May of this year, healthcare employment increased by 24,000. This increase is in line with its average monthly job growth so far in 2009. Clearly, when it comes to the need for healthcare, demand far outweighs supply, and it's important to nurture the technology and advancement that leads to medical breakthroughs. However, in doing so, we must also consider that those who use our healthcare system we have to be accountable to them as well. Patient access to life-saving technology and drugs is critically important. With the cost of health care bankrupting American families, we must consider how we can make things work for our citizens. It's important that we have a pathway for options such as biologics, but it's equally important that this pathway be safe. Our experience in the field of generics has taught us that multiple entrants into a pharmaceutical field or category can drastically drive down price and increase accessibility of drugs for patients. And I'm eager to hear from our panelists about how the FTC envisions a market for follow-on biologics that will allow innovations to flourish and also serve to better our healthcare system and protect the health and the wallets of Americans. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Braley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you've been paying attention to what my colleagues have been saying this morning, you will appreciate this is a tough job. This is a tough job that we have. I have friends on both sides of this issue. You've heard great arguments on the strengths and weaknesses of these various proposals. And I think that the thing that unites us all is a strong desire to make something happen that's going to benefit the people who are going to realize whatever potential medical gains there are to be realized from the research and development of biologics. And that's what brings us here and motivates us. I want to thank the chairman for holding this important hearing. And we all know that establishing a fair pathway for follow-on biologics is extremely important, and we stand to see tremendous healthcare improvements as biologics continue to come to the market. And when you look at the challenges we're facing with the broader healthcare reform debate, these are questions that have enormous implications going forward, and that's why we're all so focused on this issue. We know that biologics have improved the treatment of many Americans and saved countless lives, and these innovations will only see more and more use in coming years. The proteins that form the bases of biologics are extremely complex, and I must say the policy questions surrounding the creation of a pathway to the market are almost just as complex. Any pathway for follow-on biologics must ensure fair competition without discouraging innovation in the industry. We owe many of our biggest medical achievements to those who have spent significant time and resources researching and experimenting with drugs, and biologics is no different. We need to continue innovating, and we must make sure that every American who needs them can access life-saving drugs and biologics that are a result of that innovation. I have been studying this issue closely since joining this committee and hearing from parties on all sides of the issue. I'm glad to see that we are gearing up to address the issue today, and I'm confident that at the end of the day, we'll have a proposal that both encourages innovation and ensures affordable access to those life-saving biologics. I look forward to continuing in these negotiations to make sure that Iowans that I represent continue to benefit from innovative, affordable medications. The FTC has a great deal of expertise and a long record of ensuring fair competition in the marketplace, but that record is is sometimes not always perfect. They have thoroughly examined Waxman Hatch in the past, and I always take their findings very seriously. That's why I look forward to today's testimony, to the follow-up hearings we're going to have, and I want to thank the chairman for convening the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Braley. Gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have much to add to what's been said. Obviously, we have on one end of the equation the need for research and development to proceed in a way that's meaningful and leads us to new discoveries that can benefit consumers. On the other hand, we've got, on the other end of the equation, we've got the interests of affordability and access for the consumer, and we're struggling, or we're not struggling yet. We're working hard to figure out where the right balance is going to be. The testimony today is obviously going to be helpful in that process. I just hope that when we reach the balance, we come to it principally through the perspective of what makes sense for the consumer. And so I look forward to the testimony, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we continue moving forward on health reform legislation, it is important that we take a long, hard look at prescription drugs and how we can work together to reduce drug prices and increase patient access to life-saving drug therapies. I'm a co-sponsor of H.R. 1427, and I thank Chairman Waxman and Chairman Pallone for sponsoring this legislation, because I believe this bill effectively safeguards against unsafe drugs entering the market while allowing patients while allowing patients to access lower-cost generic drugs. I recognize the importance of encouraging innovation in the pharmaceutical industry. As the report authored by the FTC shows, innovation will not be hampered by allowing biologic generics into the market. First, the research shows that it will most likely take 8 to 10 years to develop the manufacturing capacity to make a similar and interchangeable generic for a brand name biologic. More importantly, the amount of money required to produce the generic, between $100 and $200 million, will limit the number of generic manufacturers. In other words, assuring that generic manufacturers can enter the market after a 5-year exclusivity period will pose little threat to the brand name industry, but it would have enormous paybacks for consumers. I strongly believe that encouraging competition, particularly in the healthcare industry, not only promotes creativity and energizes researchers to discover better and more effective products, but it reduces costs. I think it's important that we give this complex issue some context. Like many of the states represented on this committee, Illinois is facing a budget crisis, a deficit that's approaching $11 billion. As a result, many of the programs currently in place to help our citizens are facing drastic cuts. Among those programs headed for a cut includes the Illinois CARES RX program, a program that provides prescription drug assistance to 172,000 seniors with high drug costs. Many of these drugs cost patients tens of thousands of dollars each year. Some can be over $100,000, and out-of-pocket co-payments could run $10,000 to $20,000 a year. We obviously have to do all we can to bring down drug costs for patients. I believe that H.R. 1427 will help us do that. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you and further the health and well-being of our constituents and bring drugs to the market in a safe and timely and affordable way. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. DeGette.
Chairman, I'll submit my statement for the record. Let me just say, an issue that none of us knew one thing about, we now are quite conversant, and I think we need to move forward and talk about how we're going to resolve it. I'm very much eager to hear the testimony of Commissioner Harbour today. I think that will lend some light onto this very tough decision we have to make, and with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. And Mr. Inns? No, he's not here. Oh, okay. I think we've heard all the opening statements. I just want to make sure that that's true, yeah.